Ready to go? Sweet. All right. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of GIS Peer Success Webinar. This is episode number 11, Key GIS Cloud Considerations. I am your host, Toby Soto of GISsuccess.com. It's a leadership management resource website with blog, online courses, and downloadable content to help you make a successful journey as a GIS professional. This episode is sponsored by GISsuccess.com online course, which is how to take your GIS team from good to great. It is now a self-paced online course, so now you don't have to wait for these initial rollouts. And it's designed to improve your GIS leadership skills by focusing on 3 key elements, which is your relationships, your GIS roadmap, and your staff skills, and using that in a framework to develop a GIS staff skill development plan, and to not only raise your productivity and staff morale, but ultimately giving you the knowledge to be an effective GIS leader and the ability to pursue and level up your GIS program. So if that sounds good to you, you can find out more. Go to GISsuccess.com and click on the ad on the right, or if you're on your mobile, it'll be down at the bottom. So just wanted to get that out of the way. We got a large community. We had at least 88 people signed up for this one. So this is definitely something of interest to a lot of you guys. And, you know, I want to call you guys a community and not an audience, because, you know, we're all in this together. And we're all going through this journey and moving forward with our GIS. And so I just want to say a huge thank you, first for showing up, and also taking time out of your day to spend an hour with us and go through these topics that we have in front of us. And, you know, honestly, you know, when you show up, it lets us know that we're providing relevant content to you. And honestly, it's extremely motivating for us to keep, you know, moving forward with the GIS Peer Success Webinar series. And, you know, I just really appreciate everyone that comes out and joins us. And so for those of you who are watching this on the replay on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so that you get notified of future uploads of the GIS Peer Success Webinar topics. And lastly, everyone, you got to listen up on this one. We have a special announcement at the end of this webinar, so you don't want to miss this because you're going to want to have first priority on this whole thing. So just going to put that little tidbit out there. Definitely watch this all the way through, and you'll get to hear this special announcement that we're going to have. Let's go ahead and move to our co-hosts. We have Wade Kloos and Tim Nolan. You guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Go ahead, Tim.
All right. Well, hi, I'm Tim Nolan. I work at Collin County. I've been here for a long time. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you've noticed I just had a work anniversary. So I realized this month that I've actually hired people that are younger than my career at Collin County, which is kind of freaking me out. So I'll just leave it there. Wait, I'll pass it on.
Hi, I'm Wade Kloos. I'm the Director of Enterprise Systems here at Utah Department of Natural Resources. Mostly I focus on GIS, but increasingly other enterprise systems like UAS operations is another thing that I'm trying to start up here. That's it for me.
Awesome. So a couple of housekeeping notes. When you guys go into chat, make sure you set the tab to all, so it just doesn't go to the panelists. And if you have a question, you know, go ahead and put it in chat, and we'll try to catch it along the way. Or you can use the QA box for posting your questions. That way they don't get lost in the shuffle. And last but not least, in order to get even more value out of these discussions, you can also go to our Slack channel, and that's gissuccess.slack.com. The invite was in your email when you signed up for this webinar, but I'll also post another invite in the chat. So if you want to hop on there, you'll be able to take advantage of that. All right, so today's webinar is Key GIS Cloud Considerations, and we have a very special guest with us today. Nathan Heazlewood. He's the practice lead for the GIS Project Management Office with Eagle Technology in Arizona. If you guys have been on LinkedIn at any
Did you really
time,
say Arizona?
Yeah.
did I say Arizona? Oh my gosh. I'm
Wrong
sorry.
time zone.
New Zealand. Oh, I saw the Z. Ah.
No geography major there.
Oh, sorry guys.
As if New Zealand didn't have a hard enough time getting on all the maps, right?
Yeah. Anyways, he's very prominent in LinkedIn. He has like over 5,300 followers. And, you know, I would just lastly check, he had 61 articles in LinkedIn. That's amazing. That's a lot of time and effort, you know, so kudos to you. Long-standing career in GIS, over 25 years. Started as a geospatial analyst, and along the way, you were an aerial photography aircraft navigator. Bet you have some.
Yeah, just for a short time, but yeah, that was a different role that I had for a while.
Yeah, and then you ventured into IT, like a lot of us, learning your chops on the IT side for GIS, and then you moved into project management. And so, like I said, now you're the practice lead with Eagle Technology in Auckland, New Zealand.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything I missed there?
There's plenty that you could add into that. Big stint with the British Ministry of Defence for a long time, so that was an interesting place to work as well. Yeah. So, yeah, quite a few other things which I'm sure all of us could mention in our careers. So, but you got some of the big things in there. Yeah.
Sweet. So just so that people can kind of warm up to you, what is the day in the life of Nathan Heazlewood? What's it like?
So I typically drop my two daughters into school on the way into the office, and then quite often, you know, as a lot of us do it when we're at this level of our careers, I start having meetings and writing reports, and don't get to do that much actual GIS anymore, which sometimes I miss. You know, in those meetings, it's vital to have that background knowledge of GIS a lot of the time. So that's useful when you're talking to senior managers and IT managers and those kinds of things. Then throughout the day, I have quite a few Scrum meetings or Kanban meetings, which I know you guys have talked about in the past, and I remember talking to Tim about in San Diego a few years ago, and it was pretty new. So, you know, doing all of those things with the teams that I'm managing. I'm currently, although I work for Eagle Technology, which is the Esri distributor in New Zealand, quite often I work for on large contracts and get embedded within project teams with some large clients. So right now I'm doing a major GIS modernization project for Auckland Council, which is quite a large local government organisation in New Zealand. In fact, it's the largest local government agency in New Zealand or Australia. So it's 1.5 million citizens. About 11,000 personnel working here, hundreds of you know, heavy GIS users, desktop GIS users, and thousands of the personnel here are using web-based GIS or mobile-based GIS every day. So, you know, it's no, New Zealand's pretty small, 1.5 million population altogether, but this organisation's pretty heavy hitter, and makes use of all of the sort of tools that you'd expect with sort of lots of federated GIS and different sites and so on, and a lot of servers that we're managing. And so that's a big part of my day. I'm also looking after a team of project management staff, and also I do sort of manage some other projects for other clients. And that's one interesting thing about New Zealand in my role here, is that quite often I have quite a wide variety of clients and industry sectors and sizes of organisations, which I run projects for. So, you know, some of our projects are 2 weeks long, others are 2 years long. So being a small country, I guess, and quite a small team in relative comparative terms to other countries, it means that we get to see a lot of different things across the whole GIS industry, which makes it interesting.
Awesome. Cool.
You have a big conference coming up, right?
Sorry, what was that?
You'll have a big conference coming around the corner. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have the New Zealand Esri user conference is coming up in August. That's always a lot of fun.
August. Okay.
Yeah. And we do have some regional conferences coming up in the next couple of weeks in New Zealand, which are really good as well. So if anyone's listening and wants to come along to those, or if anybody wants to get on the plane from the States, you'd be more than welcome.
Yeah, I've seen some of those pictures from the New Zealand Esri conference. You got quite the dress up get up there.
Yeah, it's always a cosplay dinner. So, you know, the conference dinner is normally 400, 500 people all in effort and really getting dressed up. But it's quite a competition going on a lot of the time with people. So everybody puts in quite a bit of effort.
Well, I saw this picture. It's you as Ziggy Stardust. And, man, I was searching and searching last night, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, oh, I gotta find this picture.
There's quite a few. Have been the Darth Maul one is probably better, and been Gene Simmons from KISS, and quite a few.
Gosh.
Things. So I'll dig out some photos and send them along to you after this.
That'd be classic.
But yeah, it's a great conference if anyone wants to come down sometime and visit.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have a pretty good time. So let's get into your presentation. I'm really curious to see what you have for the cloud considerations.
So can you see my screen there?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a couple of sort of overarching themes that I want to talk to you all about as well as part of this. So there's one question that comes up quite a lot, and I'm sure it's you guys probably discussed it before, but if you need to hire a GIS manager, are you better off hiring somebody who's from a general management background and then teach them GIS, or are you better off to promote somebody who has a GIS background and then train them in leadership and management skills? It's quite a difficult decision a lot of the time. So I've seen it work really well. Either of these options work really well, and I've also seen them work really badly. So be interested in your guys' thoughts on which you would prefer.
I'll go first. I would usually tend towards B, taking someone with a GIS background. That way, since they've already kind of come through the trenches and kind of understand the complexities of GIS, that's a lot. That having that already ingrained in them, and then giving them the tools to become a leader and a manager, I think that's a little more easier transition rather than the other way around.
You know, I'll comment on this. I think I'm with Nathan. It's a little bit of both sometimes. I like what you said, Toby, that, you know, it's important to have a knowledge of GIS to understand what it's capable of doing. So when, you know, but sometimes a lot of GIS managers were analysts before they were managers. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to break away from being an analyst and still getting hands-on to then becoming management and doing more manager things. But I think in the GIS space, I would think that I would rather have someone that knows GIS, then you can train them in management than the other way around, because at least you're kind of spatial thinking. And I think that's hard to, I think you're sort of born with that. You're not really, it's hard to train someone to think in a kind of a spatial way. What do you think, Wade?
Well, I guess I'll agree in the sense that it really depends on the person. I think, you know, if part of your ideal person was going to be growing in an area that they did not have experience in before, in other words, they were a GIS person, but they didn't have management skills, or they were general management and didn't know GIS, I want to know their aptitude for acquiring new skills. You know, what could they tell me about what they learned on their own in the past? But ultimately, I kind of want to side with option B, because at least they are aware of the gamut of things that GIS can be applied to without having to learn all of those multifaceted ways that GIS can deliver benefits. But I think ultimately it's up to, you know, the individual that can impress me, that they could build on skills that they don't have, or that they have, but they, you know, need to venture into a whole new field. It really depends on that person, but I'm open to it.
Yeah, I agree that what I've found is it does tend to depend on the person. There are some general management people from that background who can pick up at least the main concepts of GIS and understand it enough to be able to have proper discussions with their technical personnel, and also understand the concepts that the technical personnel are trying to get across to them. So if you can do that, then option A can work. But I would also agree with a lot of you that my preference would be option B. But then again, there's some GIS people that can make that step up and have some of the leadership traits, or learn some of the leadership traits that they need to become managers. But you know, it's a difficult question, and sometimes it depends on the situation as well. So I'll move on to what I think is a related point, which I've just started alluding to, which is how much detailed technical knowledge should a GIS manager or leader have? How technical do they need to be? And also, how current do they need to maintain their technical knowledge, and how far forward sort of thinking do they need to be? So this is something which I'm going to touch on with talking about GIS in the cloud, but just so we're setting the scene, maybe if you all want to comment on these questions as well.
I think it depends on the organization. You know, I'd probably say a lot of our viewers, a lot of our community is really small shops where you may have 1 or 2 people in GIS. And so you're a working manager. And at that point, you really have to be technical. I mean, you're having to converse with IT, you're having to do the architecture, spec things out, be knowledgeable of future trends, be knowledgeable about security, all of those elements. And so there is a technical aspect to that in that small shop scene. But once you get into larger organizations, you know, like in LA or, you know, some sort of big metropolitan city, now you have dedicated staff that are technical in these certain areas. And you kind of just, you don't have to really know so much of the technical stuff, but just kind of know enough to kind of bring it all together and get these people talking and manage the project forward. So that's kind of been my experience along the way.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that it kind of depends on what the character of the GIS shop is. In other words, is it 1 or 2 people that are trying to do more, or is it part of that larger organization such that that GIS manager or leader could afford to take the time to be a visionary and to drive a culture shift in an organization where it's really valuable for them to not focus on the technology so much as the strategic thinking. And so again, it kind of just depends on where that organization is that makes for the best fit of that individual.
Yeah, Jordan Cremona makes a good comment along those lines, Wade, about just thinks that the GIS manager needs to be forward thinking. And I would agree with him there. I think even if you're a small shop, like Toby was saying, you need to make time to go sell your GIS. You need to get out and understand where it's going, as well as the day-to-day kind of stuff, because otherwise you're not going to make any more progress. You're going to just get buried in the work you're doing. Where here you have a chance to be, if you can visualize, or if you can be a little bit visionary, then you can get I think you can take GIS to the next level.
Okay, great. So how I want to link these sort of high-level concepts to the rest of the presentation, which is focusing more on GIS Cloud. So GIS in the cloud is one of these subjects which I think that GIS managers and leaders, they may need to understand the complexities or the decisions that they need to make in this area. So that's really the reason for asking these questions up front, is because maybe if your organization is one that's thinking of moving things into the cloud, you need to you as a GIS manager or GIS leader needs to understand some of the things which I'm going to talk to you about, and have that base knowledge, or at least understand the high level concepts. So let's get into that. So basically, as a GIS manager, what you're trying to work out is, what's the right tool for the job? Is it on-premise or is it the cloud? And how do you make those kind of decisions? One thing is, which I think you've all been talking about, is different GIS shops, different GIS operations. They're all can be very different to each other. So it's sort of saying horses for courses. My GIS is not the same thing as your GIS, and there's so many different organisations that are using GIS. Some of them are corporate, some of them are federal government agencies, central government agencies, local government, city government, through to tribal authorities, or small businesses, right through to charity organisations. So all of those organisations, of course, are quite different from each other, got quite different requirements and objectives. So this makes it quite complicated, and working out which advice that people are giving is actually relevant for your organisation. And as well as the different sort of types of organisations and sizes of organisations, there's also the different industry sectors that we serve. So GIS is used in pretty much every industry sector that you can think of, everything from utilities through to defence, through to banking, through to disaster recovery and emergency services. So when you need to work out for your organisation how your considerations fit with what you need from GIS, and things like moving GIS into the cloud. So another complexity with this subject is that the cloud is quite a it's a difficult thing to define. It's a bit like GIS. There's, the cloud has a lot of different meanings. So I think it's important to work through and isolate the different, what your specific definitions or interpretation of the cloud, what are you actually talking about? So there are several different groupings of cloud offerings, everything from IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, SaaS, which is software as a service. So IaaS is basically where a cloud provider will just provide hardware and networking for you, and then you have to organize to install the software and the data and all of those kinds of things on top of that infrastructure. Platform of a service provides more of sort of the core software, the base software that you might want to work with, but you will still need to do quite a bit of the implementation on top of that as well. Software as a service is kind of like a complete package where basically you're consuming the software and you really don't need to do any of the setup and configuration of that software. You may need to load your own data into it and things like that, but to give you an example, so ArcGIS Inline is probably software as a service. And if you're just moving some of your service to a cloud provider, but you're doing everything else, then that's probably more like infrastructure as a service. And then you can also take things even a step further than software as a service, which is managed services, where effectively you get an organization to take care of a lot of the back-end activities and things like managing databases, managing users, managing administration tasks, managing backups, managing all of that. So this is a service which my company, Eagle, actually offers in New Zealand, where effectively we're trying to get it so that the GIS people out there are just doing the GIS and making the maps, setting up the web apps, doing all of the fun stuff at the front end, and we're taking care of all of the sort of back end activities and so on at the back end. So this scale of different options that you've got, of course, the prices for everything start varying and all of those kinds of things. And a lot of the differences in the different activities, you kind of need to understand how this fits in with your organization's objectives. So some of the trends which are affecting these decisions around things like whether to move to the cloud. Of course, we all know that GIS is being used by more and more people, and all of the advances with things like mobile GIS or GIS in browsers is meaning that there's a lot more users, and they have many new expectations. And a lot of the users don't come from a GIS background necessarily, but with things like Google Maps, for example, there are a lot of the general public are a lot more familiar with geospatial data and technology than they used to be. Of course, there's also been a huge increase in the number of apps and so on, which are consuming GIS data and consuming GIS processing. So one of the big considerations is how do you deal with this increase in load on all of your systems and servers and so on. Another big trend in recent years has been, the growth of big data. And if you think compared to maybe 10 or 15 years ago, how much more data we're dealing with now, things like LiDAR and satellite imagery and so on, just keep on increasing the amount of data which we need to deal with. And GIS has always been big data. We've always, compared to other systems, we've always had a lot more data to deal with, but that data is just increasing all the time. So what you really want to do is to not overload your systems is something that you need, all of us need to look out for. And of course, we all want our GIS systems to run quickly and for queries and things to return results fast and for display to run really fast. So one of the other things, sort of trends which is happening, is that corporate GIS, at least, is becoming much more aligned with mainstream IT. So with GIS, particularly in large organizations, but also, I guess, in medium and a lot of small organizations as well, there's a lot more integration with other systems. And with that, GIS is now becoming sort of a business critical application in ways that it wasn't before. We need to have, a lot of organizations actually rely on their GIS being running all the time, and a lot of their every day-to-day operations are actually relying on GIS. So that sets some new expectations for GIS around things like uptime and performance targets and speed and everything else. So, when you think about the types of systems which GIS is being integrated with now, these are some of the sort of main groupings of systems which are very commonly being, GIS are being integrated with. So, you need to, this places new demands on what we need to do with GIS as well. So just moving on from those integrations, we have all of these sort of business critical activities for a lot of organizations which GIS is now part of. So things like supply chain, dispatch and logistics, asset management and maintenance planning, through to traffic management and commanding and control for emergency services, through to things like threat assessment. So, you know, some of these things, GIS, we weren't really doing a lot of this even 10 years ago, but these are where a lot of GIS is actually moving. So one of the issues that we have is that quite often people from a GIS background, we sort of talk a different language to our cousins in the IT departments. So we actually had some interesting meetings where I've been talking in GIS language with other GIS people, and on the other side of the table there's been IT people who have wondered what they haven't understood what we're talking about. And one of the common examples of that is when we start talking about topology. And of course, us from a GIS background, we're normally talking about you know, network topology in terms of road connections and routing and that kind of thing. But topology actually has a different meaning to our IT cousins and colleagues, which is server topology, the configuration of how all of the servers are knitted together. So, you know, this is just an example of how we can be talking a slightly different language, and that can affect things like having discussions about moving things into the cloud. Another funny example I had of a meeting a few years ago was talking with some IT people about, and they started talking about pen testing, and it was the first time that I'd heard that term. And I used to have a plotter that when it initiated, it came up with a message saying pen testing. So I sort of wondered why all of these IT guys were talking about pen testing on a plotter when in fact they were talking about penetration testing, which is checking that your system can't be hacked. So it took me quite a few good minutes of wondering what on earth they were talking about to sort of work out that pen testing was to do with security. So yeah, that's just an example of some of the confusion talking with your IT people. So bringing us back to talking about the cloud, you know, some of the things you need to do is to carefully evaluate your requirements, and also things. So one of the examples of things of this is what uptime service levels you need to be, your GIS needs to be meeting. So sometimes when I'm talking with clients, I have to ask them, you know, so what do you want? What do you really, really want? Quite often they say, well, I want it all. I want it all. I want it now, and I want it to be really cheap. But unfortunately, you can't always get what you want, and you have to make some decisions. So, you know, quite often I get, you know, if I just go out and ask a business client, what uptime do you need? Quite often their response is, oh, we need, you know, 100% uptime, or we need 99.999% uptime, which really, sure, we can do that, but to do that, it starts costing a lot of money because you need a lot of redundant servers, you need a lot of failover, you need a lot more computing capacity to actually be able to do that. So, you know, people actually needing 99.999% uptime, really, that's the sort of uptime that you need for something like air traffic control. Air traffic control, you know, lives are on the line. You definitely need that level of uptime. However, a lot of GIS systems, you know, if they go down for a couple of hours, or if you have to take them offline to do some patching or to do an upgrade or something like that overnight, it isn't actually going to cause any, might cause a little bit of you know, problems with your day-to-day operations for an afternoon or something like that, but people's lives aren't on the line, so it's not in the same category. So you need to evaluate, you know, the costs against the benefits. Some of the other considerations with deciding whether to move your GIS into the cloud, you need to think about your integrations to other systems. So where are those systems going to be hosted? If they're going to be hosted on-premise and you're moving your GIS into the cloud, then how are those systems going to communicate? What are the channels which you're going to open to do that? You probably can do that, but is it really complicated? Will it be slow? All of those sort of things you need to think about. And this also includes things like authentication. If your authentication systems are going to be on-prem, then how do you connect the cloud through to that? Another key consideration for the cloud and things like managed services is you need to make some decisions about what skills you want to maintain within your organization. Do you want just the map woman superheroes to be the ones which stay in your organization? Most of the time, that's actually what GIS people want to do. We want to be doing that sort of GIS superhero work. So do you want to also be retaining, DBAs and network engineers and server engineers as well? In some organizations, you are going to have those people anyway, because you already have you need those skills for other systems and things like that. So maybe that means that those people are going to be on your staff anyway, so you can keep them and they can do the GIS work as well. But in other cases, particularly with some of the smaller GIS shops, maybe you don't need to retain all of those types of skills within your organization, in which case it makes the cloud a much more attractive option. And something else to consider with this is the hours of support that you want those people to be available. If you want things like 24-hour support, then sometimes outsourcing that to another organization that's going to have staff on call or working 24 hours, there can be some benefits around that. Some of the other things to consider with moving things into the cloud, of course, there's data security and regional regulations. So if your data is going to be hosted in another country, then what are the laws around security and privacy of that data in those countries? Can that country's security agencies access your data? Or looking at things the other way, are there laws in your country which say that you are not permitted to place your data onto servers in a different country? So you've got to research those things and check that out. But some of the other things to consider with this is, does it matter for the type of data that you're providing? If your data if it's something which you're pushing out to the public as open data already, then does it really matter where that data is being hosted? It probably doesn't. So it depends again on an organization by organization basis. But it can also, in some cases, it depends on some of your data might have security requirements and other data might not. So maybe you can have a hybrid approach or split what you're doing with your data. So one example of that, theoretically, could be the CIA. So, obviously the CIA is one of the most security conscious organizations in the world. And a lot of its operational data, they certainly wouldn't be hosting anywhere in a different country or anything like that. However, the CIA also publishes this wonderful resource for geographers around the world, the World Fact Book, which I'm sure back when we studied geography, a lot of us, turn to this all the time because it's a great source of up-to-date information about the world. So, the CIA could actually, this is public data already. If the CIA wanted to, they could actually, host this particular data set in the cloud, and there's far less risks about it being hacked or something like that. So, again, it's not just on an organization by organization basis making these decisions, it's also on a data set by data set basis. Some of the other things to consider with the cloud, unfortunately, in New Zealand, we have too many unfortunate incidents at the moment, and so we recently had some major earthquakes in Christchurch, and if your servers are, particularly for things like emergency services, being held in a area where these types of events might occur, then maybe you want to have at least some of your data or some of your functionality hosted somewhere else, and possibly might want it at least replicated into another jurisdiction or another country. Another thing a really important thing to consider with the cloud is when you get spikes in usage. So quite often, if you've got a internet GIS system, it might be getting dozens or hundreds of people using it each day. But then what I've seen a lot of times is then all of a sudden in a major news outlet, a newspaper or online newspaper notices something which you've done, and then out of the blue they publish an article saying, oh, here's a great new map, click on this link and take a look at it, and all of a sudden your usage goes from hundreds up to thousands or tens of thousands. And it's really embarrassing if you have that link there and then your system is overloaded and can't deal with the number of requests, and you've got this great news story out there saying, come and take a look at our great map, and then it's not working. So that's another benefit of moving to the cloud is what's called elasticity, that a lot of cloud offerings can adapt to these sort of spikes in usage automatically and automatically give you more capacity to deal with this sort of thing. Some of the other considerations sort of with the cloud is, one of the benefits of the cloud is, again, that elasticity, that you can also reduce your capacity at if you have low periods of usage. So perhaps, on the weekends or through holiday periods, you can consider sort of tuning down the amount of capacity from the servers that you need. However, some of the things which you need to be careful when you're setting up a cloud implementation is to look out for things like cost per activity. So if you want to make a change to one of your servers or something, how much are the charges to get that cloud provider to make that change for you? Maybe the month-to-month cost of running those servers might be pretty cheap, but if there's a whole lot of add-on costs for making changes to your system, then you need to know what those costs are up front as well. You also need to be doing things like checking things like minimum charge costs. So this is an issue that I've come across where sometimes you want to tweak a server or something and turn up some capacity to do some performance testing, perhaps just for one day. You need to check if you're going to get charged for a whole month for doing that. Sometimes the charges can not necessarily be just based on an hourly rate or something like that. They can be a monthly rate, and that can be another factor which could end up costing you a lot of money. So that's the end of what I wanted to present, but just talking about Christchurch there with their earthquakes. They also had another major terrorist attack last week, so I think it's appropriate just to as part of this presentation, send my condolences to my colleagues and friends in Christchurch. So peace to you all, and thanks. So coming back to some of the discussion, turn over to you guys, and what did you think?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. You hit some of the key items that I've always had roadblocks with. Definitely data security. That's been something that has been really on the forefront here in the U.S., at least in the local government side, because a lot of new laws kind of come down on the cities where if certain data breaches are happening, you're having to pony up some financial responsibility behind that. So that puts a lot of people on their heels when it comes to cloud, because they feel that they're losing control when, actuality, if you put the right things in place, you're not going to lose that control.
I guess in the US, you've got a lot of cloud providers in the same country, which is useful. Most countries these days have at least some local cloud providers. But again, you have to evaluate a lot of the data which you hold. It doesn't have any security implications for releasing that data. In fact, there's a lot of open data which you're already pushing out there. So if you can isolate the particular data sets which you need to be concerned about and consider how to deal with those, then that's the sort of things which you need to evaluate on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
I have a question for Nathan.
Sure.
Don't mind fielding one, yeah?
Yeah.
GIS can be expensive, right? On-prem GIS can be expensive. What would you say somebody or a department or an agency just getting into GIS? Would you recommend cloud right off the bat, or what would your approach to someone like that be?
Sure. So the approach that I'd recommend for them would be, as part of your GIS operations, to start using things like ArcGIS Online, which, you know, everything's set up there. Esri's taking care of all of the patching and updates and upgrades in the background, and so that makes it pretty easy, right? So yes, you can be having some desktop sort of pro applications for a few people, but for a lot of your other data and a lot of your other purposes, start looking at things like ArcGIS Online, and you know that's in the cloud, of course, and you do need to evaluate all of the sort of cost for credits for what you want to do and so on. But you know, Online's a pretty good starting point for a lot of small organizations.
Yeah, good, thank you.
What about your experience there, Nathan, with integration with other business systems? What are some of the gotchas that people should be thinking about when it comes working with, you know, discussing with other systems, you know, their capabilities and how they link with GIS?
Sure. So that's one of my big jobs at the moment at Auckland Council. We have quite a lot of integration with SAP here. So there's quite a lot of SAP interfaces which are calling for, they want a map in the interface, and they've got integrations to pull up things like addresses and things like that from the GIS. So some of the things to consider with that, again, that's, you know, the SAP people actually talk a completely different language to the GIS people. So for a start, you need to make sure that you understand what they're talking about. And that there aren't any words which mean a different thing in a different to different people. So one common example of that is the word portal, which of course, if you're using ArcGIS, you know, we all talk about portal for ArcGIS, but SAP also has a product called Portal, and a lot of other software vendors have a word called Portal. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a meeting and somebody else is talking about portal, you need to check, which actual portal are you talking about? So that's one of the things. Some of the other things to be aware of is performance. So, you know, if you are needing to link your tables, your feature classes or whatever to a table in somebody else's system, and you're using things like a direct database connection, it's quite often people designing those sort of integrations go, oh, we'll just take this data here and we'll attach this data over here, and functionally that all can work fine. But then when you start to have thousands of people using that connection, then, you know, what's the performance going to be like? So that's really critical for performance testing those types of integrations. Mm-hmm. The other things which get complicated when you're working with integrated systems, if you, and this is where, you know, GIS is moving much more into mainstream IT. If we want to make a change to the GIS system, we not only need to plan what that means for us, doing a big upgrade of ArcGIS here, and so we need to do all of that planning for what that means for us, but we also need to plan what that means for all of the systems that we're integrated with. And although with things like services, so we try and get them to be consuming services rather than direct database connections and so on, that certainly helps. Mm-hmm. We'll need to test everything, and the services in theory should mean that we can make changes, and as long as those services stay the same, those other systems should continue to work normally. But that also means that we need to align with those other systems doing their upgrades and things like that. So things start to, when you're integrating, you're meshing a lot of things together, and that's great that, you know, the efficiencies that you can get from your day-to-day business operations get a lot easier, and the GIS functionality adds a lot of great stuff to those other systems. But it also means that in the back end, things more planning and need more work to make sure that everything's work properly.
Yeah, you mentioned a key point there, which is web services, because a lot of third-party business systems, you know, things like that, they say they integrate with GIS, and then when you start lifting up the hood, it's like, oh yeah, you have to import the shapefile, you know,
Yeah.
into there, and that's like, to me, that's not integration. You know, that's all this pre-processing, and that has to then, you know, shove it up. So, but yeah, if you can find out, you know, are they utilizing web services, then that makes it so much cleaner of a transition. And like you
Yeah.
said, now you're not rev locked on this application because it doesn't integrate well with this one. You know, it's just reading the web services. It doesn't matter what versioning that you're on. You know, so that definitely is a huge help.
Yes, definitely. There's, you know, we try and encourage anyone who's thinking about it, doing any integrations with GIS to be looking to use services rather than sort of tight coupling of functionality and those kinds of things. And another thing when you're talking about integrations, I've been in a lot of meetings where people have said, oh, our software integrates with GIS. But then whenever I hear that, the first thing that I ask them is, which version of your software integrates with which version of GIS? Because quite often maybe their most current version of their software integrates with a version of GIS that's 10 years old. And you know, if you're not talking about the same versions, then sure, that kind of works in one circumstance, but quite often it doesn't work in a whole lot of others. So these are some of the things you've got to be careful about.
No, Nathan, that's an excellent point. You know, when you do, you know, a big system like SAP or things like that, I really think it's a good idea to bring your, anytime it says in the scope of work must integrate with GIS, you must have the GIS people there so they can ask those questions. There's a lot of times in IT, they won't. They'll just check the box. Oh, it integrates with GIS, and then no real questions are answered. You need an expert in there to kind of,
Yes.
you know, like you mentioned, just really sell, you know, like bring it home.
Yeah. Were there some questions from the audience that we want to take a look at, or how are we going for time?
I think we're okay on time. I'm looking at, there's something here that popped up. So Toby, if you got anything else to ask real quick while I'm looking through the feed.
No, I just want to first and foremost, you know, thank you, Nathan. I mean, this has been very valuable to a lot of us, because, you know, the cloud is scary, you know, and when you don't have the expertise and the knowledge behind it, you don't know what questions to ask. And so venues like this kind of bring it to the forefront and allow people to kind of dissect the information and get to be a little more knowledgeable and to be able to talk to IT about their needs. And because that's been a really big sticking point, is people being able to talk to their IT and talk about GIS, and they get a lot of pushback. So the more knowledge they know, the more terminology they know, the easier it is for them to talk to IT and then actually, you know, begin some type of implementation plan. So this has really been a great benefit and a lot of value to everybody. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. Good. You know, the cloud doesn't need to be scary, and there's a lot of benefits to using the cloud, which hopefully I pointed out some of those throughout the presentation. But we're coming back to the original points. You know, part of our role as GIS managers and GIS leaders is to understand some of these high-level concepts that I've been talking about. So this is at least the level that I've been talking about here. You don't necessarily need to know how to push all of the buttons and turn all the wheels to make cloud work, but you need to understand some of these high-level concepts to be able to base good decisions on.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I guess from a GIS management perspective, I really appreciate the talking points that you've identified. I think it's important that, you know, the folks listening to this begin to search out what business drivers relate to these talking points. Just as a, you know, as I was thinking, as Nathan was talking, just about, you know, my organization here, you know, I began to appreciate the fact that we work in very much like a distributed system for GIS. In other words, we have 7 divisions, and they all can be very technical on a spectrum. But when it comes to the entire enterprise, we don't really have dedicated technical experience to do things like database administration, systems administration. And so when we begin to look at what's on the horizon for us as an enterprise, well, one of the factors that we're considering is the ArcGIS Enterprise shift in the way cloud computing can work, or at least what the demands on the critical or essential components of that system are. And I have to look at, well, what does that mean to us? That means we're going to need a few more servers out there besides just ArcGIS server as a dedicated, you know, web tool set. Is now we got to think about a data store and a web adapter, and that infrastructure has a cost to us because we are required to use a state-run IT organization. They charge us for every one of those servers, and by comparison, I'm going to guess it's kind of on the high side. So if I was to begin to think about what a managed service could look like for us, how can we avoid hiring a database administrator, a systems administrator, and the infrastructure that we would have to contract out for our IT folks to spool up for us? And would they really give us the elasticity that we get from other, you know, web-based cloud service providers? So there's some really serious cloud strategic questions that our organization has to begin to address. And so I really appreciate this content, Nathan. I think you bring up a lot of good points. And so I think the challenge for us GIS folks is to say, how can we identify the business drivers that relate to these talking points? And where do we begin to kind of check the boxes of, yeah, we've considered that, and here's the pros and the cons of each. So you've given us a lot of things to think about here.
Sure. Well, it does sound like maybe you should be considering a managed service, and you know, some of the other benefits with that. If you have specialists who are providing that managed service, and if they really understand, you know, doing the same sort of things for 10 different organizations, and they really understand what they're doing, they're going to be experts at doing a lot of that back end stuff. Yeah. And if they are looking after a lot of those things for you, then you can focus on the cool stuff at the front end, which is, you know, typically what a lot of GIS people, that's what we'd prefer to be doing.
You know, even if some organization was to charge us $1,000 a year to take care of our hosted and managed services, it'd still be $20,000 less than hiring one person as a systems administrator.
Yeah.
And we'd have to find somebody that wanted to work for state wages.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly part of the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, very good.
So one last comment I have. I was listening to a podcast last night, and they're talking about SaaS and the fact that it's still kind of the Wild West, and that it's still evolving. And I guess the next iteration beyond SaaS is a network. They call it network, but I don't know, maybe it's a NAS, N-A-A-S. But it's kind of like now packaging all this stuff up together, and now you're just buying like this package application to do things through the network. It's really interesting, but it's all frontier, you know, it's all forward thinking, but you know, these are these types of questions and considerations that we're all going to have to be contemplating with as we keep moving forward in GIS.
Well, Toby, I know we're about to wrap up. We do have an audience question. You want to answer that after the webinar, or you want to roll with it right now?
Let's roll with it now.
All right. Well, hey, Brian, you're still on. He's asking, beyond GIS talking to IT, what are your thoughts, Nathan, on GIS being an inherent component of IT within the organization?
So that's a great question, which we could talk about for a long time. You know, in a lot of cases, I'm seeing the core GIS team actually being part of the IT team, and I think there's a lot of benefits in that because you start to learn the IT language and know what's going on within the IT team. But then at Auckland Council, for example, we've got a sort of hybrid approach to the structure of the team. There's a fairly sizable core GIS team, which is part of IT, but then around in a whole lot of business units, the planning team, the environmental team, the transport team, you know, they each have their own GIS specialists as well. We have we call the federated user group here, which is when all of those different GIS people get together occasionally and have seminars and that kind of thing. So that it's kind of a bit of both, having a central GIS team under IT and individual or little smaller teams out with the business units as well.
Awesome. So Nathan, how's the best way people can get a hold of you?
Best way is probably through LinkedIn. I've got a fairly unusual second name, so pretty easy to Google. So Heazlewood, pretty easy to find me. So just reach out through LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you are also on the GIS Slack as well.
Sure.
So
yeah,
you posted some great stuff in there, and you know, you notice you're getting some instant responses. So you got some great stuff going on there.
Well, I'm interested to hear this major announcement, which...
all right. So here's the major announcement. Next GIS Peer Success webinar, which is April 25th at 12 noon Pacific time, we're proud to announce that we are going to have Jack Dangerman on. This is a very special opportunity for us. I haven't seen him on any other webinars or anything like that, and so he graciously agreed to join us, and I think this is a very wonderful opportunity for all of us because, you know, he's not talking to CIOs, he's not talking to heads of state and heads of country, he's talking to us, the middle managers, and so this is going to give you an opportunity to ask questions, you know, through the chat and through Q&A. Just kind of gives you that opportunity, and we'll try to address as much as we can. You know, Jack, he's a talker, so you know, we may start with one question and it may go for the whole hour, you know, but it is a great opportunity. But I want to make sure is that, you know, we do have limited seating. It does cost money to run these webinars, but I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to be online with Jack, and the way you're going to be able to do that is if you subscribe to the GISsuccess.com newsletter, you're going to get notified when these seats are available, and then you can instantly get on and register before it goes out to social media. So I want to give you guys that opportunity to get up here, get up on there first. So be the VIP to be able to talk to Jack. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to really kind of dig in, you know, to kind of, you know, get Jack's take on us middle managers, you know, and how we're going to work with executives and, you know, discuss strategies and leadership. So anyways, that is the grand news, the grand announcement that I've been holding back on you guys.
Fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. So we're really looking forward to it. And again, Nathan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You're a rock star out there, and you put some great content out there. If you guys have not seen his content, go to his LinkedIn, go to his articles. He's got great content. And I know you got another article coming out here pretty soon. You know, we kind of got a little sneak peek of it. So another great article. So
yeah,
you're doing a great job.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
My
Thank you. Thanks for coming, and we will catch you next month.
Fantastic.